How's it going, guys? Like promised, I'm going to be doing a Discipline Priest Burning Crusade guide. These are the topics that I'm going to be talking about today. It's going to be a bit of a longer video, so the reason I want to show you the order in which I'm talking about stuff is, if you're not interested in some of the things I'm discussing, you can maybe kind of like jump along in the video to try and, get the questions that you have answered. So I kind of have everything mapped out for the order in which I'm going to be talking about stuff. So let's just go ahead and jump into it here. Rule number 1. Do not ever, under any circumstance, watch Bean. You'll lose rating. No, I'm just kidding. I love Bean. So we're going to talk about races. I don't think there's really too much to talk about here. There's two really obvious ones. If you don't PvP often, maybe they're not obvious to you. But best Horde race is going to be Undead. Best Alliance race is going to be Dwarf. It's pretty cut and dry. I will say, though, that there are a couple other options. If you want to play Troll for Priest, it might be somewhat viable if you're playing without classes that have a Mortal Strike. So if you play a lot with a Mage without a Rogue, 2s, if you play with a Warlock, or if you're even playing some like cheeky little comp at 3s like Mage, Warlock, basically you have no Rogue, you have no Warrior, you have no Hunter. Troll Priests get a ability called Hex of Weakness, which reduces the healing received by the target, 20% healing reduction. So it's actually pretty good. So maybe depending on the people that you play with, you might actually think about playing Troll. So it's not completely useless. And for Alliance, I don't think I would recommend playing anything but Dwarf. I mean, Stone Form is just crazy good. You have no way to get rid of poison, so being able to get rid of Cripple, Wound, Viper Sting, things like that, super important on the Priest. I will say, though, most likely there will be a faction change in Wrath of the Lich King, or sorry, a race change, but if you were, for some reason, either trying to save the money or you are thinking maybe there won't be a race change, if you play Human because you're looking more towards Wrath, it's not a terrible idea. You're disadvantaged in Burning Crusade, but looking forward to Wrath, maybe that's okay. So we're going to talk about specs here. Specs is pretty interesting. There's so much you can do with pre-specs. I'm going to kind of go over the talents that I guess I play, and sometimes I do things like a little bit differently than most people, but it's kind of comp dependent and also even race dependent, as I was talking about. If you're Troll, you most likely always want to be playing Blackout because you have something called Shadow Guard, which is basically Lightning Shield, but shadow damage. And that Shadow Guard has a chance to proc Blackout, which is pretty good. So I play pretty, generic spec. I don't think Points in Imp and Fire are worth it. Focused Power, when I play in 2v2, I don't think Focused Power is worth it. People might think that's crazy, but I don't really feel like I need fast MDs versus Priest, or sorry, versus Mages in 2v2s. I don't really use Mass Dispel a ton to get rid of, buffs or stop people behind pillars from drinking. Like, I don't need the extra speed. Paladins aren't really seen in 2s and 5s. Incredible talent. You're always going to want this in 5s. Ice Blocks, Paladin Bubbles, Paladin Bops, Mass Dispelling Bloodlust. You're definitely going to want this in 5s. But in 2s, I don't really see a huge need for it. Improved Mana Burn, I actually don't really play that much in 2s, but I play with a Warrior. If you're playing with a Mage, you're playing with a Warlock, you're playing with a Rogue, you want Imp Mana Burn, so sometimes I take points out in that. Martyrdom, you can actually take points out of if you feel like you're not going to be the main target. As Priest Warrior, I'm always targeted. As Priest Rogue, maybe not so much. As Priest Mage, I'm not 100% sure. I played a little bit of it. Sometimes I get targeted, sometimes I don't, but normally the Mage can peel for me. It just kind of depends like where you want to shift the points to. I really like Enlightenment. I think Enlightenment's really good. I think it gets better as time goes on as well because your stamina, intellect, and spirit increase. Also, apparently intellect increases the amount that spirit helps you regain mana. So it's kind of like a double value talent there. So I like getting as many points in that as possible. Blessed Recovery, 1 point, super good for buff protection when you're getting Spam Purge. Spell Warding, super good if you're playing the non-offensive comp. So if you're playing with, honestly, maybe you only take Spell Warding for, I'm trying to think. I think this talent's probably pretty good in 3s because I don't really think that you're going to use a lot of Greater Heals, Smites, Holy Fires in 3s. Never use Holy Fire, actually. But in 2s, as a Rogue, I feel like you probably want Divine Fury. With a Warlock, you probably want Divine Fury, and with a Mage, you probably want Divine Fury. So maybe this is just really a Priest Warrior thing now I think about it, because I don't really think you're going to get killed as most of those other comps. So spell warding, but I like spell warding in 5s and I like it in 3s because you're definitely more of a target and you're not going to have as much time to kind of like be able to use those smites and free casts and whatnot. So spell warding is a pretty good option in terms of healing. And then you also have the option to kind of like do the blackout build, which I don't play ever because it DRs with mace stun and I play mainly with a warrior. But if you're playing like mage warlock in 3s, or you're playing with a mage in 2s, or a warlock in 2s, or even a rogue in 2s, this probably isn't a bad talent. You know, you can kind of decide that you don't even want to go into Holy Nova, which is mainly used for survivability, in my opinion, versus like double DPS because it's pretty mana inefficient. So you can kind of like build these things a different way. So like let's just go ahead and build without martyrdom right here, to kind of like allow you to be more flexible with how you want to play stuff. I always get 5 out of 5 reflective shield. It's possibly arguable that maybe you don't really want that for 5v5 perhaps, but in 2s and 3s I think it's pretty good. So blackout build, duration on pain, and then you can go reduce chance to hit. Actually, you don't even have to go like, you don't even have to go down to this. It kind of depends if you want Mind Flay or not. Mind Flay is pretty good. I guess most people probably wouldn't go Enlightenment. There's just so many ways you could build a spec. Still have 1 point left here. Maybe just one random point in Enlightenment or Martyrdom. It really depends on what comp you're playing and how you want to play it. I would say that Priest Mage and Priest Warlock probably goes down to Mind Flay. You could do a weird build where you go all the way down to Silence. You get no pain suppression. You don't really see that too much these days, but when you're making a spec, you just gotta kind of ask yourself the question, you know, what am I getting value out of? And I realized when I was playing Warrior Priest, I was getting trained all the time. I took points out of Imp Burn, I took points out of Focus Power, and I put it into like raw survivability and throughput, which was Enlightenment with the increased intellect, the increased stamina. I would say a pretty generic build. I'll just give you the most generic build right now. Okay, this is the most generic Priest build. You have Improved Burn, you have Focus Power, you have Holy Nova for survivability, and Blessed Recovery. So if you just want the standard, you know, kind of all-around decent build, this is probably the best one. And this is probably like the base that you should be using in order to figure out what you want to do. So like, let's just say, I'm not going to spend too much more time on this because I think talents they're pretty intricate, but also kind of minor in the same sense. But let's just say you're playing 2v2 and you are playing with a warlock or you're playing with a mage, right? Like you would drop these points, you want to go into blackout. You definitely want burn, but you could take this point out here. And let's say now you want to go to Mind Flay, all right? Now you start taking these points away because you still want the burn, and then you get the pain increase, you get the resist, and then you get Mind Flay. And now you can even go to Improve Fear, Shorten Fear. So like this would probably be a pretty good blackout, Mind Flay, Short Fear build. Definitely still want Improve Renew. It's really, really good. But you can kind of see, like, I guess, where to take points from. Focus Power, not insane in 2s. Improve Burn. I would say, unless you're playing Priest Warrior, you probably always want Improve Burn, if I'm being 100% honest. So you could also just play a standard blackout build, I guess, which maybe I already showed you, but let's just do this, because unless you're Priest Warrior, maybe you don't even want Spell Warding. I don't think 1 point in Martyrdom is necessarily worth it, but yeah. So talents, it's I hope that gave you some insight, I guess. It's tricky because there's so many points to play with, but hopefully it gave you some insight on, you know, what talents are good for specific comps and whatnot. We're gonna go into macros. Sorry, this guy's gonna be kind of long because there's so much to talk about in Burning Crusade all the time. Slash cast shoot means you could spam it and it doesn't cancel your shoot. Just something where, like, if you're spamming a key, it won't prevent you from doing it. This is the exact macro that I use for Shadower Deathing the closest target. I'll run out to a mob over here so you guys can see how it works. But basically, when you're trying to death a Poly, or you're trying to death a Blind, or whatever you're trying to death a Fear, this will target the closest enemy near you and use Shadower Death. I will say, though, that if you're fighting against a mage and you're fighting against a rogue, just be a little bit careful, because generally speaking, if you try and death and it's going to be on the mage, it makes it a little bit more difficult, because if you knock back the cast, if they have no shields, it can mistime your death. And if you're playing against a rogue and they have Cloak of Shadows up, and it targets them, it's going to resist, and then you're not actually going to take damage because the ability doesn't go off. So just be a little bit careful and just kind of have the mindset that sometimes you might actually need to manually target someone. So you want a regular death on your bars as well. especially considering this is a rank 1 death, which is, you know, a little bit more mana efficient. So I have a full rank death on my bar as well for more damage. Just to see how the macro works, something's close to me, I press it, it deaths it. Simple. Closest target, press it, death. Shadowfiend pet attack, just so you can, you know, kind of control your Shadowfiend with the same bind. I have power infusion for myself, and I have this is just a macro to keep a placeholder on my bar. I have a second bind to power infusion other players that aren't me. This is a pretty interesting one. People see like my abilities kind of flipping around on my action bar here. You can see 4. So if I'm targeted on an enemy, my keybind for 4 does Mind Blast. If I'm targeted on a friendly, my keybind for 4 does Binding Heal. This is just a really easy help harm macro, which is incredibly useful because binds are very tight in Burning Crusade. So this allows you to kind of double up on one bind, and Mind Blast is really good. It's on a good bind. Binding Heal is really good. It's on a good bind. So it allows you to use 2 binds for 1. You can use this for any ability that is pure defense or pure offense and pure defense. So yeah, I have Arena 1, 2, 3 Mind Control. Pretty unnecessary. I focus Mind Control. Probably a little bit of a more useful bind, but you don't really use Mind Control that much in Burning Crusade. It's really expensive. It's a really slow cast time. Focus Mana Burn, obvious. Focus Purge, obvious. I have Dispel Party 1, Dispel Party 2, and Dispel Self. These are really good macros. I would definitely recommend having Dispel macros. There's going to be a lot of times where you're, you know, either healing someone in your party and you get Nova'd, you got to Dispel yourself, or you're dying and someone in your party gets Nova'd. You just don't want to have to switch between them and yourself and go back and forth, and, you know, it'll get really mixed up. I have the same thing for Power Word Shield 1, 2, 3. Not as important, and honestly, I don't even really use these that much anymore. But I really liked back in the day having these because I'd play with a rogue and it'd be like, yo, shield me real quick, I want to vanish. And instead of having to target him and shield him, it's, you know, I would just pop a shield on him with Party 1, 2. This is my Devouring Plague macro. It's bound to Inner Focus. I have Inner Focus separately bound, and sometimes I Inner Focus other things besides Devouring Plague. But if I ever use Devouring Plague and Inner Focus is available, this is the most expensive spell you have. If you have an Undead Priest and you don't realize how expensive it is, now you know. It's 1,000 mana, so it's super good value for Inner Focus because that shit will ooze me really quick. Smite and Rank 1 Renew. Another help harm macro to save a bind. A little bit weird, but Rank 1 Renew is really good for buff protection and getting combat, so definitely something that you want bound. We'll talk about that more later in the downranking spell section. But basically the same type of macro. For macros, basically pretty simple stuff. I would say the only ones that you might not realize that's a really good macro is the help harm macros, which are super helpful. You guys can see all my action bar space here. Next on the list, add-ons. So I'll go talk about the add-ons that I use that are relevant, you know. The 5-second rule, this is a common question I get. You can see here when your regen starts to give you full regen when you're out of combat. So right now, this is all out of combat regen when this one's ticking. But then when you're using spells, it shows you exactly how long you have to wait before you start getting that out of combat regen. Not super necessary, but kind of handy. Fly plate buffs is a pretty nice one. People ask me all the time, you know, what shows like debuffs over people's head. Fly plate buffs, definitely a good one to get. It'll show your dots and stuff like that. Item rack, not really important to gameplay, but pretty easy to switch your gear and your sets between PvE, PvP, things like that. My slot is not relevant. Omnibar. Omnibar is the one that shows all the kicks at the bottom of the screen. Omnibar, we'll go ahead and press test so you can see all the stuff that I'm tracking here. I like to track cooldowns, kicks, things like that. Weak auras are really nice. Weak auras is the most overpowered add-on ever. You basically could weak aura anything. I'll show you that in a second because I skipped some. S Arena is the one that gets my arena frames over here, allows me to adjust them. People ask me this question quite a bit, but S Arena, you can adjust everything, move them over. Thread is irrelevant, Totem Timer is irrelevant, Trinket Menus is basically irrelevant, but yeah, weak auras, I'll show you that in a second, DBM, and that's it. Okay, so weak auras are, you know, people ask me, you know, what is the thing that shows up in the middle of your screen when you're CC'd? That's a weak aura. It's called Loss of Control, or, you know, the Inner Fire reminder that Inner Fire is running out. That's just right here. You know, Bangle of Endless Blessings indicator. All those are weak auras. Super easy to find. You know, these are the names of them. They should be on WAG.io or whatever if you want to look them up. But all right, so we're going to talk about gearing, what I think stat priority should be. and I guess the best way to get gear. So this is there's no same like line to get gear for every single person. It's going to be different depending on the situation of gear that you have, which gear you want to replace, but we'll try and make this short and simple. The best gear that you can get if you're starting out, because I'm going to start out, you know, you're a fresh character, you want to do some PvP, is the rep gear. Unfortunately, you got to get your rep, and you got to be able to get some sort of resilience to kind of get into arena and get into battlegrounds and start getting your cap. So you definitely want to start with the rep gear. In terms of honor gear that you want to farm, it's not too bad, but you want the necklace, you want the ring, and I would say you want the bracers. So it's really only 3 pieces, unless I'm miscalculating somewhere here. Which isn't that bad. You don't want the cloak because it's got no MP5, it's dog shit. Belt, no MP5, it's dog shit. Boots, no MP5, it's dog shit. And mana is really important. Oh yeah, trinket, sorry. And trinket, yeah, obviously. MP5 is really important on Priest. I know there's no MP5 on the bracers, but the bracers come with a socket, which I think gives it a little bit more value than like the best, you know, PvE bracers you can get, for example, which doesn't have a socket. And then like the best PvP boots that you can get have sockets. The best PvE belt, sorry, I said PvP, but yeah, the best PvE belt you can get has sockets, but generally speaking, you want NG belt anyway for Priest. And then if you want some extra regen, you can, you know, there's some belt options you can get from crafted belt from SSC, which is pretty good. And you have the Karazhan belt, which is pretty good. Karazhan boots, which are pretty good. The crafted boots from SSC, which are pretty good. And then even the drop boots from SSC, which are pretty good. You guys don't know what I'm talking about. You know, I'm trying to tell you where they're from, and it should be pretty easy to find. But Trash Drop, you know, Belt of the Long Road, Boots of the Long Road, and then Fathomore drops some pretty good boots. So there's some pretty good PV options there. Best cloak you can get is from Kael'thas. It's the Spirit Cloak. The Prince one is also pretty good as well. You know, if you don't have Earring of Soulful Meditation, which is Bis, you want to go for Bangle. Very, very important to have at least one of these trinkets for regen. In terms of weapon, you know, people say that Vosh Mace is Bis. It's kind of debatable. If you have Vosh Mace, don't go for PvP Mace. If you don't have Vosh Mace, go for PvP Mace eventually. It's pretty simple. The offhand is incredibly good. It's got a ton of healing, ton of resil, super valuable piece. The wand isn't really that insane, but I just have it because it has resil. The best helm that you can get, you don't actually use PvP helm, but I will say that if you're starting out in PvP, feel free to, you know, farm the PvP helm if you want it. In terms of sorry, the reputation, don't ever buy the blue gear with honor. It's not worth the honor. This is just Tar Revered. You're gonna get this anyway by trying to farm Bangle, but tier 4 helm is really good. NG helm is really good, and keep in mind if you're already farming NG for the belt, you know, you can get the helm basically not too much extra. And then tier 5 helm is actually Bis. So the reason why the tier helmets are better is because the helmet for Priest has no regen on it. For the PvP version, you can see right here, it's got no Spirit, it's got no MP5, and then the tier helmets have both of that. So MP5, very important for Priest. And then let's just say you're a little bit more advanced, I guess I should say. You're not just starting out. You have full Gladiator gear already, the Season 1. What pieces should you buy? And how should you buy them? I don't get enough points every week. Should I buy the Season 1 stuff? I'm going to talk about that right now. So unfortunately, the Season 1 to Season 2 gear difference for most classes is not a big deal. It's really not. But for the 2 classes it's really important on, unfortunately, is Priest and Warlock, because they get huge armor gains in this season. With that being said, if you're not getting a lot of points every week and you're itching to PvP, it's not a terrible idea to buy the Season 1 stuff to start maybe helping you get more points towards the end of Season 2. I had full Gladiator gear this season, and I bought Weapon first because I had a Shard of Virtuous, and I bought Offhand. Offhand's a huge upgrade, by the way, because the difference was like 30 healing and 12 resil, so it was really big. But it's just tough to say. You know, I don't think it's bad to buy the Season 1 gear, and if you were full Gladiator gear, it's pretty obvious to just kind of like look up which pieces are the best in terms of upgrade. But the chest has the most armor of an upgrade, the legs have the most armor of an upgrade, and armor is really important because classes like Rogue and Warriors that sunder armor and remove your armor, the more armor you have, the less effective those things are. It sounds really silly, but armor starts to diminish at a certain point, so if you get past a certain threshold, sunder armor Instead of, you know, you take 4% less physical damage when you're all the way at that really low amount of armor, you'll take like 10% less damage. So it ends up being really good, that armor gain. There's a different path of gearing for everyone, basically, you know, in terms of how you should get stuff, is what I'm trying to say. So there's a lot of variables. How many points you get per week, you know, what pieces of gear you're replacing versus other pieces of gear. Like, some people might want to, you know, I say get chest first. It's got the biggest upgrade. But if you have Season 1 chest and you have blue legs, then you want to replace the blue legs. So it's a different path for everyone. Just try and look at each piece of gear and figure out which is the biggest upgrade, and you want to replace that every single week. And just know that if you're buying the Season 1 gear, don't feel too bad about it. The stats are very much the same, but the armor is where you're going to kind of fall behind, so maybe you'll be a little bit weaker defensively. In terms of gems, this is a little bit of a controversial topic, I would say, because I gem Spirit, and a lot of people tell me MP5 is better, but I think Spirit's better. And I will say that when I put on the Spirit, I think maybe it's just like a little bit worse in terms of actual in-combat MP5, but the gain from having that out-of-combat regen is so much better, in my opinion, than the fractions of the in-combat regen, that you make up for it over and over and over by having the out-of-combat regen, like by a large margin. So, for example, this is 7 MP5 and 4 Spirit, okay? So right now I'm at 115. So we're going to add 7 to that, which would be 122. That's 122 MP5, and we're going to see how much this 4 Spirit does. This 4 Spirit gives me 3 MP5, which is... So I go from 122 to 125. So that's even more than 2 MP5. I think the Spirit's better. And then you're also getting the out-of-combat regen, which is... this would be 268 to 278. It's 10 MP5 out of combat versus 2 MP5 in and out of combat. It's just, I think Spirit's better. So you can see my gems. The way you want to gem is you want 3 spell hit gems and spell hit on gloves, so you're hit capped. So I have 1, 2, and my 3rd spell hit gem is going to be in my bracers. I haven't farmed them yet, so we're not going to talk about that. And then you can see in all my other sockets, I gem a little bit of Resil here because my Resil isn't like super high by any means, but yeah. Spirit healing, Spirit healing, Spirit healing. I think it's good. And then, like, for example, if I were to get the PvE boots, I personally want the ones with the double socket. Some people think that the crafted ones are better. It's pretty close regardless. I would put 2 purified in here as well. Also, a nice little note is that these gems are cheaper. So, it's nice. Alright, enchants, pretty simple. Thralmar, Revered. Healing MP5. Aldor Exalted, if you don't have Exalted, obviously Honored. You know, healing MP5, it's pretty big. Resil on chest, healing on bracers, hit on gloves. We talked about that already for hit cap. The biggest spell thread you can get. Bore speed on boots. Minor run speed, help you get fears and the stamina. If you could. I didn't actually talk about professions, like what professions you should be, but enchanting and engineering are going to be best for priests if you don't have enchanting. Like, basically, I would say prio engineering over enchanting, but understand that enchanting is really big. So, for example, Season 1 to Season 2, if you had a Light's Justice, that's 380 healing. Season 2 weapons, 420 healing. That's 40 healing increase. The difference in healing from Light's Justice to Season 2 weapon, 40 healing. That's how much healing you get on your ring. So you got to understand how much value that actually has. And then, obviously, 81 healing on weapon. Enchants are pretty simple. I don't think anyone should be struggling with that. The only one that you maybe would be confused about is you want to get hit cap, so using the spell hit is pretty good there. So now we're going to kind of get into gameplay a little bit more here and actually talk about, you know, the priest class instead of just kind of like talking about, you know, what to do to get into arena. So we're going to talk about the utility that priest has. Obviously, it has defensive dispel, mana burn, which is, you know, people talk about a lot, is very unique in what situations you want to be burning over, you know, kind of dispelling, doing damage. It's a tricky one. I think that one's going to be kind of hard to fully cover, and I think it's going to be kind of something that you need to learn on your own. People wanted me to talk about, you know, Fear Ward, when to Fear Ward. This changes as undead, in my opinion. Like, this changes as undead. You Fear Ward probably a little bit differently. And Master Spell. So, in terms of mana burning, I play Priest Warrior. I don't really burn that often. In 3s, I burn more. You're probably more likely to burn if you play the Rogue. I don't really ever play with the Rogues because rogues keep people in place. Mana burn is also really good to try and bait kicks. People don't like people don't like mana burns. So if you're ever in a situation where, you know, you're kind of under a little bit of pressure, if you start casting out burns on enemy mages, on enemy healers, they might be incentivized to kick that, which will open up your holy tree to allow you to do more. In terms of Fear Ward, in 2s, I never Fear Ward when the gates open, but I'm undead. So that might be wrong. If you're not undead, you probably want to Fear Ward as soon as you get in. So during that minute of arena prep, it's at a 2-minute cooldown. But as an undead, I don't really ever Fear Ward in the starting entrance. And the reason why is because I really like to save it for my Shadowfiend if I'm fighting a warrior. Because if you Shadowfiend versus a warrior, you go ahead and put your Shadowfiend out, you just instantly target it, you Fear Ward it, then you'll get full mana back, because it's a really common strategy to fear your Shadowfiend. In 3s and 5s, I think that becomes less relevant, because I think warriors are more incentivized to use their fear to prevent damage or try and set up a kill than make it a pure mana game. So in 5s, I will always Fear Ward at the start of the game. If I'm playing with a Resto Shaman, I'll Fear Ward him, because he has Tremor Totem, so he's more important to have the Fear Ward on. If I'm playing like a comp like RMP or MLP, I'll Fear Ward myself always at the start of the game. If I'm playing with a Resto Druid in 5s, I'll Fear Ward myself at the start of the game, because I can spell his fear. Actually, as an undead, you should probably Fear Ward your Druid, excuse me, because you can will Warrior Fear, and he can't will Warrior Fear. In terms of dispels, offensive and defensive, there's a lot to dispel. There's a lot to dispel. Basically, the reality of it is, if an enemy has buffs and you're playing offensive, you want to dispel them. There's almost never a bad time to be dispelling offensively versus anyone. Every buff is a good buff to get off. I know it sounds silly. Obviously, the ones you want to prioritize are like powered shields, ice barriers, innervates, things like that. But by pre-dispelling, which is maybe something, you know, you're not doing, it helps you get those buffs off really quickly, right? You know, if a druid's innervate and he's got mark, thorns, whatever, you didn't pre-dispel, you're not going to get that innervate for a long time. So offensive dispelling, if you have a global, it's a good button to press. You know what I mean? You're not healing. You're not dealing damage. Dispel. Dispel is a huge part of Priest. There's no way I could say it. Offensive dispels are really important. Defensive dispels are a little bit different. So versus mages, you generally want to dispel a lot on your person that's going to get crowd controlled. So for example, when I play with Mez, I want to dispel him a lot if I have the globals. And it's not just when he's in a polymorph. It's not just when he's in a Nova. You want to get chilled effects off of him. You want to get Winter's Chill off of him. Things like that. Because the reality is, if Mez gets polymorphed and he has chilled, 5 Winter Chilled, you know, freaking Frostbite and a polymorph, he's got like 7 or 8 debuffs. So constantly removing them is really good in order so you can actually get that stuff off quicker, like the important ones. Versus Warlocks, I actually like dispelling Warlock dots, which is maybe something that you guys don't do, or maybe something that you didn't think about doing, but I like dispelling Warlock dots every single time they go up as a useful global. If a Warlock presses Corruption and Siphon Life, I press Dispel. And the reason behind that is it actually hurts their damage a lot. It makes them use globals, it makes them use mana, which forces them to life tap, and as a priest versus Curse of Tongues and Counterspell, you know, you use your shield, your palm, your renew, and you dispel dots, and slows down damage even more. So we'll take a look at this game. All right, so this is a Warlock Resto Druid. I feel like I dispel a lot this game. There we go. Corruption 5 times, Shadow Embrace 4 times, Siphon Life 4 times, Moonfire, Insect Swarm. Dispelling is actually a really, really important thing to do versus Warlocks to slow down their damage. Like even in 3s when I'm playing against Roguelock Priest or something like that, or Roguelock Druid, you want to dispel those dots. It's gonna help you tremendously. So in terms of defensive dispelling, I would say Roots off Druid's important. You always want to dispel Insect Swarm too, by the way. If Druid's using Moonfire, Insect Swarm, you're trying to get aggressive, you want to dispel it. You want to dispel Warlock dots. You want to dispel Mage crowd control. You probably want to dispel Priest dots as well. It's a little bit harder for Shadow Priest because they get so many debuffs with like Shadow Weaving. This is like 5 debuffs. It stacks up so quick. But if you can dispel versus them, it's good. And then if you're fighting against a priest, you want to dispel their Shadow Word Pains. And also, if they're using Devouring Plague, if you ever see Devouring Plague, always abolish disease. 100%. And then in terms of Mass Dispel. So Mass Dispel actually has some pretty unique ways to do things. So you can actually Mass Dispel. Like, I was playing with Mez the other day. He got Node behind the pillar. I actually Mass Dispel to dispel him while he was out of line of sight. You can use this to dispel druids' innervates behind pillar. You can use this to keep people in combat behind pillars. You can use this to get people out of stealth if they have a buff. Like, so if you're fighting against a rogue mage and you run in and you mass dispel, you can dispel something, get him out of stealth. But that's just kind of like the utility way of mass dispel. In terms of actually dispelling as mass dispel, if you ever fight against a mage or a paladin and there's an ice block or a bubble or a bop, mass dispel prioritizes dispelling those, which is super important. So you want to use mass dispel to get that out, get that off. And then in 5s, mass dispel is actually a really good tool to actually just remove multiple buffs off multiple enemies. Normally when I see a Bloodlust in 5s, if people are grouped up, I'll use a couple mass spells to try and get them off. If we're playing 5s and I see everyone behind the pillar, kind of like turtling at the start of the game, I'll run in, I'll do a couple mass spells right off the bat. And then it also gets double value. So if their team is stacked up and they have a warlock and there's dots on your team, you're dispelling dots off your team while dispelling buffs off the enemy. It's really good to use in 5s as something. I'm not sure if there's a limit on how many you want to do, I guess I should say, but I'll normally try and do a couple mass spells at the start of every single game, and normally like 1 or 2 when I see a Bloodlust go out. Alright, so in terms of dealing damage, people also wanted me to talk about deathing a little bit. Damage on Priest is really simple, man. Shadow Word Pain when you have pressure. It's not something that you want to sustain the whole game unless you have pressure. And then Mind Blast is a super safe spell to use unless you're fighting against a mage in terms of damage, because it's on the Shadow Tree. So you don't have to worry about it. If you get kicked on it, it's good. Similar to Mana Burn. And then Death is something that you basically can use almost on cooldown. Maybe don't use it if you're being trained, because keep in mind it will deal damage to you. But it's instant damage and it's pretty powerful. So I would say that Pain, Death, and Mind Blast are your main sources of damage for Priest. You're going to see a lot of smites probably more often in 2s, not as much in 3s. And then in terms of deathing, I would just say be a little bit careful when you're fighting against mages if you're deathing offensively, because that's one of your only tools to actually prevent yourself from getting CC'd. So you want to be a little bit careful with that. But I will say, this is something that's really tricky to, I guess, kind of visualize. But whenever you're dealing damage on a priest, you most likely have an option. Should you be mana burning? Should you be dealing damage? Or should you be offensively dispelling? There's a lot you could be doing. I would say in terms of offensively dispelling, normally I like to use my instant globals and then purge, I guess. Or like get a pain up. So for example, if you're fighting against a priest, you want to get the shield before you do damage. If you're fighting against a druid, normally I kind of like weaving in my pain and my death while dispelling. I kind of like almost prioritize those a little bit. And then I would say in terms of mana burning, super good to fake kicks or bait kicks, I guess I could say. And then also, if you feel like the game is going to be a little bit longer, or you don't actually think it's like a kill window, I guess, then mana burn would be better than dispelling or deathing. Dispelling or dealing damage. It's a really unique situation where you just kind of have to have an understanding of like the comp you're playing versus the comp you're playing against, and understanding your win condition. But just understand that priests are pretty like global locked. You're always going to be doing something like burning, dispelling offensively or defensively, which is probably like one of your most important buttons, and then deathing. And then dealing damage. Shadowfiending is a pretty simple one. I just want people to understand that Shadowfiend does not give you mana back if someone has a shield. So like for example, when I play against Rogue Priest, I don't use my Shadowfiend unless there's Weakened Soul on the target, so they can't have a shield. So I know they can't shield it. And I'll never use it into a Rogue if he has evasion. If you use it on a Warlock, you gotta be really careful, because if they use Shadow Ward and it attacks into Shadow Ward, it's shadow damage, so you won't get any mana back. Versus Warriors, I always fiend my Shadow Fiend. I always ward my Shadow Fiend if Fear is available. I will not Shadow Fiend if Fear is available and I don't have Ward, but I always have Ward for it. So just understanding like how to get maximum mana back from that is important. So you don't want to use it if the person has a shield. You don't want to use it if the person has evasion. Basically, if you use it on a rogue. If you use it on a warlock, make sure that you are able and capable of dispelling Shadow Ward And then just keep in mind on Z-axis, if you use it on top of the bridge and people jump down, you're going to get no mana back from that Shadowfiend. He's going to have to run all the way around. So generally speaking, try not to use it on the top of Blade's Edge. Or else you're going to be kind of screwed in terms of mana. And then also use that knowledge that I told you to screw over enemy priest. You know, if they put a Shadow Fiend on you, shield yourself. You know, if they make that mistake. Honestly, sometimes even on my Shaman, if a person puts Shadow Fiend on me, I literally use NG Belt if I feel like I'm not in trouble dying and their Shadow Fiend gives them no mana back. So we're going to talk about healing a little bit. And priest healing is actually a lot of fun. Prayer Mending, probably one of my most favorite spells ever. It's incredible. So the three obvious ones, super obvious ones, is how to heal in priest, shield, palm, renew. Okay? There's going to be some games where the threshold of damage is not high enough to break through this superb instant healing that you have as a Disc Priest, okay? And then there's going to be some games where you're spamming flash heal so hard, your teammates are still dying. It's both ends of the spectrum. The heals that I use are Flash Heal and Greater Heal. Max rank. I always max rank in PvP unless I'm using rank 1 for buff. And believe it or not, I actually do use Greater Heal more so in 2s than 3s because I'm not actually spec'd into it. I never use heal. Some people might have this bound for super efficient healing. I'm not saying don't have it bound. I don't ever have it. I don't have it bound. I see people casting stuff like this. And also I see people casting like low rank heals sometimes. And the only reason I know they're low rank heals is because they're so And I see them casting a heal. Like, you know, they'll literally be 0 mana and they're casting a flash heal. I'm not telling you not to bind those heals. I just don't have the binds for them. Look at my action bars. So I keep it to Flash Heal, Greater Heal, Renew, Binding Heal. Binding Heal, 2 people are taking damage is phenomenal. You want to definitely make sure you're using that. Palm Shield, Renew. So we're going to talk about a little bit about mending bouncing here. This is super important. So you want to make sure that if multiple people are dotted, you are stacking up for prayer mending. Like, if I'm playing 3s, I normally play like Mage Warlock in 3s. If my Warlock and Mage are dotted and they're spread apart, I tell them, like, listen, you guys got to come together. Prayer mending needs to do work. If you're pillar hugging and, like, your teammate is here, and you're on the other side of this pillar and you're over here, and you press palm, your palm's going to bounce to no one, that's a mistake. You want to make sure that you're pressing that palm next to people, and you want to get full value from that palm. It sounds really silly, but you do need to make a conscious effort that you're making sure your palm is capable of bouncing. And then finally, I'm going to talk about deathing for palm bounce, okay? So when I'm fighting against teams that attack Mez, because generally I play Warrior Priest, and he takes damage and palm bounce to me, what I like to do, and this is probably really common at higher ratings, but if you don't know, you death, and the death forces you to take damage and makes palm bounce back to him. And that is actually a very efficient way of making palm bounce back to him if you're not dotted or you're not dealing damage. Just make sure you're close enough so that palm bounce back. It's actually really, in my opinion, really important. If I'm fighting against Warlocks or double DPS, Warlocks that have Curse of Tongues on me, not dots, I need that mending to bounce back to get that extra healing out in those situations. Hold on, sorry, my dog's like walking my... And even more recently, Mez and I figured out a pretty cool trick for bouncing palm, where, for example, Rogue Mage opens on me, and my palm bounces to Mez. Obviously, he takes no damage. He uses Skull of Impending Doom, and it makes palm bounce to me, bounce to him, bounce to me. So I get 2 extra ticks. And you could actually do that same trick as a priest if your DPS are dying. I recommend not using Skull to your kind of like but you could use Skull of Impending Doom on anyone to bounce palm. Another interesting trick that me and Mez figured out is when we're fighting against Druids in 2s and he's rooted, I actually sometimes will just stand on top of him with a warrior hitting me, and the palm will bounce to him and he's in the root will deal a little bit of damage, palm bounces back to me, and so on and so forth. Yeah, if you're playing with a Warlock, your Warlock can Hellfire, bounce palm back to you. Bouncing palm is huge. If palm is bouncing, you almost feel unkillable. We're going to go ahead and talk about casting heals and faking kicks. Obviously, I told you that you have a huge, instant cast utility, but, when is the time to be spamming those flash heals, and how do you want to fake kicks, I guess? Generally speaking, if you're fighting against teams that have a Mortal Strike, you're going to be forced into casting a lot. Warriors, especially if your palm is not bouncing. Warriors, rogues, once they get this 5 wounds up, you're going to have to be casting a lot. You want to cast early, basically. You know, long story short is always use your instance on CD and then go for the cast earlier than later. And if you're under a lot of pressure, I would say, like, you know, if I'm fighting against an RMP or something, what I like to do is palm, shield, renew, all that stuff's on cooldown. Throw out the pain sup before you go for a cast. You know, pain sup and then go for the cast. So if you get interrupted, that pain suppression's up and, you know, gives you time to get out of that lockout, in which case you can start going for heals again, things like that. It's not going to be something that you always do. Obviously, you can't always pain sup before every single cast, but definitely you want to make sure that you get those things kind of out of the way before, I guess, you go for it. You know, you don't want to come out of CC and just go for a heal. Obviously, use your instance. You know, sometimes pain suppressing to keep that shield active is pretty important so it doesn't get dispelled. In terms of faking kicks, the only thing I could say about faking kicks is try and recognize what pattern the enemy is using and try and always be, you know, different with your pattern. Sometimes I fake early, sometimes I fake late, and I just try and mix it up, because if you're the same and they kind of lock on to how you fake, it's going to be really easy to kick you all the time. Faking is just something that, you know, you're going to get interrupted. It's just how the game works. Sometimes I fake really late and I can't fake my enemies, and then you try and fake instantly and you still can't fake them, and they just, you know, they hold forever. So it's a tough one. But in terms of healing, you know, cast, I guess, sooner than later, because I feel like priests are momentum based. So once you start to fall behind, it feels really hard to kind of get yourself out of that hole. Bouncing, mending, super important. Even with the Shadow or Death, make sure if multiple people are dotted to get that going. Then just try and be a little bit of unique with your fakes. Try and be a little bit different. So cooldown usage on priest, you know, you have 3 cooldowns in my opinion. You have pain sup, and you have power infusion. And I put inner focus in here just because we could talk about a little bit how to use inner focus. Inner focus can be used a ton of different ways. Some games I use it for Devouring Plague. Some games I literally use it on a flash heal for the chance to crit, just for a little bit extra healing. Some games I'll use it on a massive spell just to save mana. It really depends on the type of game you're playing. Sometimes I'll even inner focus shield just for mana. It really depends on the type of game you're playing in terms of you know, what the pacing's going to be like. I would say in 5s, I probably like never use it on Devouring Plague. In 2s, if it's healer DPS, I'll probably almost always use it on Devouring Plague, unless it's a priest, because they can just dispel the Devouring Plague, so it's good versus Druid. It's maybe only Druid, actually. Don't use it for Shaman, they can dispel it too. And then, in terms of double DPS, that's where like I actually almost always inner focus for a heal, just for that extra chance to crit, so I get a little bit more healing out of it. And then, did I say 5s? 5s, sometimes I'll just use it for a massive spell, you know? Because, yep. I want to save a little bit mana. Pain suppression and PI. So, believe it or not, PI is almost used first global every single game. Like, PI is something that, in most games, except maybe double DPS, you're using literally just to dispel buffs off the enemy team. So, versus Disc Priest, when the game starts, I literally PI, and I just press Purge 100 times in a row. You get every single buff off. And it seems weird to do that, but you're reducing the mana cost of your Purge by 20%, and you're reducing your global cooldown to Purge faster to kind of remove those initial buffs. First comps like Warrior Druid, I'll PI when we have a spot where we can go offensive, because you don't want to PI at the start of the game just to Purge unless you're like doing something crazy. So it's good to PI Purge versus like Priest teams at the start of the game. Versus Druids, once you kind of hit that like momentum spot where you want to start ripping buffs off, that's where you want to PI. And then versus double DPS, I generally PI just to spam cast. So, like, it kind of depends on the situation. I'm talking a lot about 2s because I'm more into 2s, I guess. 3s, you're probably PIing first global every single game because you want to get momentum. Like, if you play Rogue Mage and you're opening on a Warlock or a Warrior, you're PIing, you're ripping every single hot off. PI is really good for Dispel, by the way. So, like, you're global for Dispel, so if you're fighting against an enemy mage and you have PI up, you're just destroying all those buffs defensive or on your teammates. You're getting the Novas, you're getting the slows with the Frostbites, the Polymorphs, all that. So PI is just one of those things that if you're not using it at the start of the game to kind of like gain momentum, it's probably something you want to do. Offensive and defensive. Like, it's just super good. Pain suppression is... One of the things that's nice about Burning Crusade is there's no script. You know, if I'm doing a retail stream right now, or a retail guide, Enemy uses wings, use pain suppression. You know, enemy uses blade storm, use pain suppression. There's always a I use this when they use that. But Burning Crusade, there's not as much as that. So you can kind of look for enemy cooldowns on use trinkets. You know, versus Warrior, it's pretty simple because they use Death Wish. It's pretty good versus Death Wish. You know, mages can maybe use, you know, Icy Veins Pet. But sometimes you want to use Pain Suppression to just kind of like help recover, in a sense. Sometimes you want to use Pain Suppression to help recover and make sure that you protect your shield with it. Like sometimes, you know, I'll be fighting against something that's spam spelling, Pain Sup goes up, and then you power word shield, so your shield doesn't get instantly dispelled. Sometimes you want to use Pain Suppression if you're fighting against like a rogue, for example. Your warrior doesn't have a trinket for a kidney, you just go ahead and send it out there. But yeah, so it's just it's hard to say. You want a Pain Suppression sooner than later, but there's no, I guess, perfect time to always use Pain Suppression. You just kind of got to make sure that if you're kind of getting low and you feel like you're in a situation that's going to be difficult to recover, it's a good button to press. Understand that it gives Dispel resistance value, so it's good with your power word shield. So now we're going to talk about how to play offensive, how to play defensive, and when you should be doing both. It's a pretty simple thing that can be incredibly complicated. So first I'm going to talk about positioning with fear, how to play offensive. If you feel like you're ever exposing your position to get like an unreachable fear, don't do it, all right? So I play Warrior Priest a lot. I'm never going to be chasing a Druid to get a fear, because I'm never going to get it. You never win that battle. If you're playing Priest Rogue, though, for example, and they cheap shot the Druid, then they gouge the Druid, and then they kidney the Druid, then, you know, you're getting help to get that fear. So if you're getting help to play offensive, it's a good time to play offensive, I guess, if that makes sense. You know, maybe a mage is helping you with like rank 1 blizzards. But just keep in mind that, you know, if you're putting yourself in a position where you can get CC'd or you're taking a risky play, just try and have like a backup route. So for example, if I'm playing against like, you know, a Warlock or something and I got no will, I got no fear ward, I got no trinket, I'm not leaving that pillar. You know what I mean? I'm not taking the risk of, you know, playing offensive to get the CC when it could backfire on me really hard. And in terms of like when to be playing offensive as a priest, you're kind of always playing offensive. You know what I mean? Unless you're trying to conserve mana or you're trying to go for a drink, you should always be offensively dispelling or maybe trying to throw in like a Mind Blast Death, especially when targets are like in things like Mace Stun, Cheap Shot, Kidney Shot, or you're just dispelling to keep your team mobile. Priest is a very offensive healer, 100%. In terms of defense, it's, you know, when should you be defensive? Maybe if you have no cooldowns, maybe if you're looking for a reset, like for example, Priest Rogue is a super offensive comp, but you can also just kind of like hug around the pillar and play really defensive and kind of get palm bouncing on the 2. It's really just a matter of like how the game is going. I would say that your plan as a priest at the start of a game, I play Warrior Priest, so this is kind of like fake, but the start of the game, you probably always want to play offensive. Warrior Priest is different, because it feels like you're always on the back foot. But if you're Priest Rogue, if you're Priest Warlock, if you're Priest Mage, if you're RMP, if you're MLP, you know, if you're playing in 5s, you always want to be trying to get momentum with playing offensive at the start of the game. With that being said, that doesn't necessarily mean always pushing for a fear at the start. It depends on the matchup. Definitely depends on the matchup and depends what you're fighting against. So like, for example, if you're fighting against like a mage, you probably don't want to be pushing against... probably pushing in the middle map to go for fears immediately. You probably want to hold that defensive positioning. But if you're fighting against something that's like not a mage, so for example, a pretty common matchup is Priest Mage versus Warrior Druid. I'm literally mounted, running at that Druid for a fear while my mage controls the Warrior, and then eventually you get the fear. But, you know, just if it was a Priest Mage mirror, I'm not mounting and running at the enemy Priest for a fear, because I could just get sheeped and it's going to be really awkward. So yeah, just try and figure out how the game is going. And I would basically say, you know, if you don't have trinket and you don't have will and you feel like you can get CC'd, try really hard not to expose yourself for getting fears unless it's like a guaranteed thing, and maybe don't even push for fears for Druid unless you're getting help. And then I guess defensive is, you know, hey guys, I'm running out of mana, I need to look for a drink, or look, we have no cooldowns right now, we don't have blocks, we don't have Cloak of Shadows, we don't have you know, you have 5 wounds, things like that. That's when you kind of want to pull back and start playing defensive. And when you start playing defensive as a priest, you just kind of run circles around a pillar, dragging the enemy in a bad spot. You can get some counter pressure and kind it's really hard to finish when like priest teams play defensive behind a pillar. It's actually really hard to finish. Mana management, there's not really too much I could talk about here for the most part. I talked about how to get you know, good Shadow Fiends off, I guess, basically. I will note that I actually play, I didn't talk about this earlier when gems, but I play the Intellect Chance to Restore Mana gem. I think that one's really good. So yeah, in terms of mana management there. Mana management for priests, I mean, one thing that you could do is you could have a weapon swap macro for something with a little bit more regen. So if I'm not getting trained, I actually have a weapon swap macro to put on my 22 Spirit offhand instead of my Resil offhand. Pretty small. I guess I didn't show this macro, but I could show this one real quick. It's just literally slash equip both items. Right here. Slash equip, slash equip. It's hard to say, you know what I mean? Because you're basically going to be using all your buttons all the time. And maybe the only thing you could really do for mana management is go for drinks in good situations, I guess. Because you're generally speaking always using max ranks and stuff. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. Just try and get max rank Shadow Fiends. Go for drinks when you can, I guess. Maybe you could try and pay attention to this 5-second rule thing to try and like get a little bit extra value out of it. I will say that if you're using Bangle or if you're using Earring of Soulful Meditation, the out of combat regen is absurd compared to the in combat regen, like 3 times better. So like if you're using Earring of Soulful Meditation on CD, which I do sometimes, it might not be worth it. It might be better to kind of wait till you get that 5-second rule. Just for example, 135, 312, and then it goes to 231, 631. So you get 300 out of combat regen and only 100 in combat regen. So basically, if you are using 3 Earring of Soulful Meditation in a 6-minute window where you could use 3 of them, it's while you're using them in combat, it's literally not as literally equal to 1 out of combat. So generally speaking, I try and hold Earring of Soulful Meditation for when I got that 5-second rule out of combat regen, or even when I go for a drink, I'll just pop it, get a couple ticks in. And then downranking spells. So I have, we'll talk about all the rank ones I have. I talked about earlier, I have a rank 1 renew to spam like combat. I noticed really quickly and really early on that when I'm fighting against rogue teams, I was ooming really quickly by just using rank 1 renews to try and get combat off people that were going for combat. So I have rank 1 renew. Just keep in mind that if you have a full rank renew on them, you can't use a rank 1 renew. So I don't actually do this, but I know a lot of people do, and I probably should, but I should have a rank 1 fear for 2s. It's just less mana. I don't have that. Don't be like me. Have a rank 1 fear for 2s. I just use full rank fear. I probably shouldn't, but whatever. Especially since I got rank 1 and 2s, I probably should have used rank 1 fears for some stuff. Because some stuff, there's literally only 2 people to fear. And then sometimes there's 3 people to fear with pets and stuff. So you should literally use rank 2 fear, at least. But rank 1 pain to keep people in combat and stop rogues from re-stealthing. Rank 1 buffs, okay? This is a pretty common one. And this is actually really important. If your teammate doesn't have a rank 1 fort, you should always rank 1 fort. It is basically free. How much does this shit cost? It's 18 mana to give your teammate a trash buff. So when my teammates are getting spam purged, sometimes I'll literally just rank 1 renew, rank 1 fort them. Just because it costs almost nothing to do so. And then you could throw a shield up, and hopefully it doesn't get purged immediately. So rank 1 fort is always. I feel like there's no one that rebuffs rank 1 fort than me. If my teammate doesn't have rank 1 fort, I send it. I have rank 1 Spirit and rank 1 Shadow Prop bound, but I'm going to be honest, I almost never use them. So if you really don't want to bind those, you don't have to, because rank 1 Fort's 18 mana, rank 1 Shadow Prop's 225. That's expensive. Rank 1 Spirit is 225. That's expensive. The only time you're going to be like rank 1ing that is if you could feel like you could drink, and it's not that great. Shadow Word Pain, also someone mentioned in my chat, is good for covering Warlock Fear, which is also, Warlock Devour. So like sometimes I go for a Fear on a Druid, I rank 1 Pain before, so they have a 50% chance to get the Shadow Word Pain, and then they have a 100% chance to get my Fear, because that shit never works anyway. But it's actually a good strat. What else we got rank 1? I have a rank 1 Holy Nova just to get people out of stealth. And I have a rank 1 Inner Fire, which isn't super necessary, but sometimes like I'm in like a Dispel War versus Priest, and I have Fear Ward, and they dispel my Inner Fire, and I throw up a rank 1 Inner Fire because there's no other melee on the team because it's Priest Mage. Not super important, but I have it there. You could also do the same thing for Fade, but I never press it. I have full rank Fade on my bar, but if I was actually a gamer, I'd have a rank 1 Fade on my bar. So there's a couple things you could do with rank 1s for rebuffs and things like that, just to protect your buffs, because you have 20% chance for them not to dispelled, and if your shield gets dispelled, then it's really bad. Someone said you can rank 1 buff touch of weakness. I wouldn't recommend it, because if there's a melee on the other team and they take off your touch of weakness, it's just gone instantly. You could do it, but it's just an extra bind that's just like, I don't know. You can see my bars. I have so many binds. So maybe you're better than me and you have all this shit rank 1. Team comps. So team comps, there's a lot of stuff. Let me open up another notepad here. You know, Priest, there's so many comps for Priest Rogue, right? You have Priest Rogue, Priest Hunter, Priest Mage, Priest Warlock, Priest Warrior, which is actually kind of dog shit. And then in 3s, you have RMP. You have Mage Lock Priest, you have Rogue Lock Priest, you have Warrior Lock Priest, which actually is not a bad comp. Mage Warrior Priest, which isn't a bad comp either. You have Double Healer Warriors, which is Priest, Druid, Warrior. These are like the most common comps that I would fight, I'd say. This is the only variant of Double Healer that you'll want to play with Warrior. Then there's Priest. There's Priest Druid Hunter and Priest Druid Warlock, which are also pretty good. Turbo with Priest isn't that good. You know, Beast Cleave with Priest, like, is kind of meh, in my opinion. But these are, like, all the comps that you can play with Priest. So you're picking a pretty viable class here. In terms of, like, how the matches play out, very aggressive, very aggressive, very aggressive, very aggressive. A little bit more passive because you're setting up with some crowd control, and then these 3 are obviously a lot more passive. You can still like try and play offensive with them, you know, when you can, but you know you want to be efficient, and you're kind of there just to kind of keep like your DPS mobile and whatnot. Rogue Priest is super aggressive. Rogue Hunter a little bit less aggressive, more CC based. Priest Mage is super offensive when you have cooldowns and super defensive when you don't have cooldowns. So if you are trying to push for CC because you have water elementals and stuff like that, you go really crazy. But as soon as Mage is out of cooldowns, you start to retreat and play really passive. Warlock Priest, I'm pretty sure, is pedal to the metal the entire game. And then Warrior Priest is an absolutely dog shit comp. I have no idea how we got rank 1 with it, but it's one of those things where it feels like every single matchup's a hard matchup, and you're literally just you're fighting for your life every single game. Kind of a fun comp. Maybe I'll play it later. Rogue Hunter Priest. That's also probably a pedal to the metal comp, because, you know, you're not going to have longevity with that kind of comp. You know what I mean? You're all in. So in terms of, like, you know, how/when to play offensive, if you're playing a comp like this, you're probably always playing offensive, you know? So you got to kind of understand your win conditions, the comp that you're playing. You know, a lot of these things kind of interchange. I wanted to talk a little bit on how to individually fight classes. I don't know exactly what I could talk about in terms of this, but I wanted to kind of like maybe, you know, emphasize on what I do versus specific classes. So like, for example, when I fight against mages, obviously you want to try and death poly. And one thing that I will say versus mages that I wanted to talk about here is that sometimes I spam, like you can literally spam Dispel and it won't go off until a CC goes off. So if I see a mage polying my warrior, I'll literally press Dispel 100 times, and as soon as he gets polyed, it's gone. It doesn't use that global. That was something that changed in Cataclysm, I think, or maybe even Wrath, I'm not sure. But it's something that, like, you should be doing versus classes that have crowd control. You're literally pre-dispelling. So versus mages, also, like, sometimes I see mages pushing on me. A really common strat that mages try and do to priests is Nova, MCS Sheep. And if you're dispelling yourself hard enough, and you see the mage kind of come behind the pillar, you can pre-dispel the Nova before they actually get the MCS off on you, and you can kind of just walk right out of line of sight, and you absolutely outplay them. Versus Warlocks, you know, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but you want to dispel their dots a lot as a Disc Priest. Like, I'm talking about a lot. It's a really good, effective global. Against Warriors, I've talked about this a little bit, but obviously you want to ward your Shadow Fiend. It's just kind of like a nifty trick I picked up versus Warriors. Obviously, versus Warrior as well, you want to shield on CD, try and Rage Starve them. Against Rogues is tricky. Rogues are tricky, I should say. It's kind of tough to fight against Rogues, in my opinion, sometimes. Obviously, try not to give them your back, or try not to give them your front when you, like, fake kick so they can gouge you. So you want to make sure you're kind of turning away from the Rogue if they have no interrupts available. After you use your instance and you go for heals, You can, if you decide that you want to go for a cast and you get locked out, fearing when you get locked out is pretty good. So, like, if they, they do get you locked out in that holy, fearing is a pretty good opportunity there. Against paladins, I mean, there's not really much to talk about, Dispel Justice if you're playing with a druid. Mass Dispel, Bubble and Bop. Hunters, normally when I play against a hunter, I am in full turtle mode to avoid Viper Sting at all costs. Unless we decide that it's time to pull the trigger and I just have to eat Viper Stings until, we either win or lose the game. You can normally try and, Pillar Hug against Hunters pretty hard to avoid Viper Stings. And Killing Pet is a pretty good strat versus Hunters. That way you can actually get some drinks off. Also, like, Deathing Scatter when they're coming around the pillar to try and get some CC on you. What else do we have here? Against other priests, normally, like, the priest versus priest is just kind of like who's going to get the fear into burn meta. So I would just say be pretty careful and try and, like, ward their fears. And if you don't have ward and you don't have will, you probably don't even want to take that fight, I guess. There's not really too much to discuss there, I think, for the most part. Shaman. Okay, so one thing I'll say about Shaman is if you're ever in a situation where you're trying to fear Shaman and they're spam dropping Tremor over and over and over again, just every single global's Tremor, a lot of priests don't know this, so I'm giving away my secret strats here, but if they're spam dropping Tremor and they're on top of you, you have enough time to just fear them and kill the Tremor straight up, okay? So if they're spam dropping Tremor and they just used it, you fear, and if you have a dagger, you can right-click the Tremor and kill it before it breaks. If you have a staff, you cannot do that. Staff, you cannot do that. I repeat, not do that, in which case you'll have to death. But a lot of priests I fight, I'm not going to lie, they stab my Tremor, I redrop it. They stab my Tremor, I redrop it. They don't even fear. It's like, you have enough time. You have enough time, I promise you. If you're using a staff and they're spam dropping Tremor, what you have to do is you have to fear and then death. And if death's on cooldown, you might have enough time to get your wand off, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So just a little bit of a trick there for Shaman, I guess, for getting fears. You don't need to worry about the fresh drop because it takes 3 seconds to tick. So basically, you have enough time. FU, man. Sorry, Sturge. And then obviously in terms of Shaman, you want to try and spell Bloodlust. Am I missing any other classes for how to individually fight classes? I think that might be it. And then, of course, under any circumstance, do not ever watch Bean. You'll go down in rating. But no, seriously, I think that's basically it for the priest guide. Wanding for pushback is an interesting one. Generally speaking, I only do that on mages if they have no shields. You try and wand to, like, knock back a caster if you're in MCS and they're going for a polymorph. I appreciate you guys watching, man. Thank you very much. I hope this guide helped you in some sort of ways. Obviously, if you guys have questions, you can always find me at the stream, and I'll be happy to answer them. But yeah, appreciate it. And we'll be doing a Rest of Shaman guide and a Rest of Druid guide as well.
That's what they call me. I promise that you'll never be lonely. Be the band, that's what they call me.